last night she jumped up on my bed and she was scrambling around all over the place. And I finally just I said to her, I'm going to have to put you down on the ground. And if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to put you in your kennel. But and I put her down and she went to sleep and that was it. I slept till 7.
Fabulous. Yeah.
But she's more lovable now and much more squirrely and a kitten. She's a real kitten and
Yeah.
adorable. She's just a beauty. As babies are. She's in everything. So she came running up to me with something in her mouth. I pointed, she had ripped off a hank of the carpet and had it in her mouth. And I know she would have eaten this stupid thing. I would have had to take her to the hospital. So she's doing that now. And she's only 12 weeks old. So
Yeah.
here we go.
Oh, I can see the fella behind you. That's actually the first time he's joined us for the podcast. He's right behind you.
Sonny. Sonny. Yeah. Don't be afraid. You're going to be on a podcast. You are.
That tail is thrashing menacingly,
Yes.
Brad.
Yes. His face is deadpan, but the tail lets you know how.
I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street.
My good buddy Brad Friedman, friend to this podcast and friend to Golden Age detective fans everywhere, returns to Tipping My Fedora to discuss his favourite movie in the whole wide world, Rear Window. We are also joined by two of his lovely pets. But in the meantime, let's see what we think of that movie by Alfred Hitchcock, starring James Stewart, Grace Kelly, and Thelma Ritter. Welcome back to the podcast. It's been far too long, mate. So, all the way from Northern California, or not even, the peninsula, it's Bradley. Hello.
I'm glad to be back, Sergio.
And it's good to see you in such fine fettle as well. You are the host of, amongst other things, your own blog. Tell us all about it, please.
Well, it was actually kind of lonely growing up in Northern California as the only person who reads classic mysteries in the entire state. That's how it sometimes felt. I helped found a group in high school called the Sherlock Holmes Society, and we would gather together and talk about classic mysteries. So I could talk a little bit about Agatha Christie there, and John Dixon Carr and Ellery Queen. And it is true that some of the other members wore deerstalker caps and capes to the meetings. I never did anything so silly. After that, I didn't really have anybody to talk about these things with until probably around 2014, when I found the Golden Age of Detection page on Facebook and saw all these people who had the same interest. It was an international coterie of classic mystery fans, and it included some amazing bloggers like Sergio Angelini, My Fedora, and the still missed Noah Stewart, and Martin Edwards, who wrote Do You Write Under Your Own Name? And then one of the leading players in that page at the time was Curtis Evans. And I very much enjoyed going to The Passing Tramp, his blog. And he was very much about bringing back humdrum authors, old authors who had been almost forgotten or long forgotten. We talked a bit, and I started to post some fairly lengthy comments about Agatha Christie. Curtis reached out to me and said, would you like to maybe post some of these comments? They're long, they're interesting, as a guest on my blog. And I was thrilled at the offer. So I appeared on a couple of his posts. He introduced me as his guest and just let me go. And it was so much fun that I decided I'm going to step past my tech phobia and figure out how to start one of these myself. And that's how Ah Sweet Mystery was born. I didn't want to just do a Christie blog because I've read a lot of writers, although Christie's the one I probably know the most about. That's why Ah Sweet Mystery was the tag. Also because I'm a musical theater fan, and that seemed to hit a sweet spot inside me. And I've been writing for, it'll be 11 years in September, about all kinds of books and movies and TV shows that have to do with our favorite genre.
Fantastic. Now, we're not going to be talking about Agatha Christie today. We're going to be
Nope.
talking about something related to a very different kind of crime writer from the same era, Cornell Woolrich, aka William Irish, aka George Hopley, and several other names. But I hear that your favourite movie in the whole wide world is Rear Window, which is based on a short story of his. So, is this true? Is it really your favourite movie?
Well, people ask you that question, and as you know, as a fellow movie fanatic, it's an unfair question to ask. It's ridiculous.
Yep.
But this is not only as good an answer as any, but a very good answer, because it is certainly a favorite film of mine. I love old movies. I mean, I love movies as diverse as Gold Diggers of
Oh,
1933
yeah.
and The Women and Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, now Voyager. I think I tend to veer toward Warner Brothers a lot of the time, but I do love old movies. And I love Hitchcock as much as I love Agatha Christie. He's always been my favorite filmmaker. Cornell Woolrich, I've only read one novel and this short story. I'm sadly undereducated when it comes to Cornell Woolrich, and I apologize to everybody for that. But this movie has always hit some sweet spot in me. I love it. So yes, it's both entertaining and multi-layered. It's a film you could go to with your family and go out for ice cream afterwards and just say, wasn't that great? Or you could sit in front of a microphone for 3 or 4 hours and talk to a fellow enthusiast about it and never run out of things to say.
When did you actually first see it?
Well, here's the thing. I'm trying to figure that out. I must have seen it around high school, which is theoretically impossible because I think it was pulled from distribution by Hitchcock himself around 1961 and didn't come back into circulation until 1983. So somewhere I must have seen a bootleg copy. There was a film club. I think I spoke about this with you last time we talked, that used to show classic movies. Somewhere along the line, I saw it probably 2 or 3 times, enough to really love it. But I don't see how that's actually possible. I just remember that when I became aware of the fact that I couldn't buy it, that I couldn't see it at my whim, I was disappointed, and I waited very impatiently until it was finally re-released with all those other lost films.
There may have been an American TV broadcast at some point. I mean, I think the last cinema re-release was 62. And it is sort of complicated. It's one of those ones, there are actually slight issues with the underlying rights to the short story. In fact, it's one of these slightly fiddly stories. It turns out that when they bought the rights, there was somebody else who said, no, actually, I have some rights to it as well. And it got complicated and there were lawsuits. And that added to the fact that there was simply the issue that the films had reverted back to Hitchcock as per his contract with Paramount after 8 years. And that was just the deal he had with his Paramount films. And then eventually they passed on to Universal because when he moved over to them. But what eventually transpired was, and this was happened I think after he died, they then went to look at the assets and they were in very poor shape. The 5 lost films, as it were, the ones that had been out of distribution for a long time, were either made for his company, which was Transatlantic, so that was Rope, or it's the Paramount films, which is basically, Rear Window, Trouble with Harry, Man Who Knew Too Much, Vertigo. They had simply reverted back to Hitchcock, but they hadn't been doing anything with them. But I think there had perhaps been a TV broadcast. It became an issue with that whole business about the underlying rights. But
that makes total sense because it seems to me it was like an NBC Saturday Night at the Movies thing that reran, because I know I saw it more than once. It was embedded in me, and you have to see something more than once for that. And I just know how much I loved it, and then suddenly you couldn't see it anymore.
And we're talking about the pre-commercial VHS era at this point. I mean, I had seen homages to it so I was aware of it, but I didn't actually see the film until that official re-release with the other four films that was in the mid-80s, dubbed into Italian. So I saw those in Rome, and that was great.
This is Jimmy Stewart, and I want to tell you about a very special event. The return of 5 Hitchcock pictures unseen for more than a decade. 5 films from Hitch's private collection. And finally, my own favorite, Rear Window. I play a wheelchair-bound journalist observing life across the courtyard. My girlfriend is the enchanting Grace Kelly.
And, in many ways, I think Vertigo and Rear Window were the ones that stood out, but Rear Window was the one that right away I thought, oh, well, this is just fantastic. So, which is nice, because I've been looking forward to it for a long time as a fan, and therefore to have your expectations met. Obviously, Vertigo is a more oblique experience, especially when you're younger. I think as you get older, that film grows with you. And I feel I've liked it a lot more as I've got older. But I would have been, don't forget, I would have been 15 when these films were released, and I think that Rope and Vertigo in particular, I think have grown on me enormously as I've gotten older over the decades, inevitably. Whereas I don't think my opinion of the remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much, for instance, has necessarily changed all that much as a film that has less depth than these other films, it seems to me.
Man Who Knew Too Much, which I recently rewatched after a few years of not having watched it, I actually enjoyed it even more than I thought I would.
Right, okay.
I know it's super long, and there's that center part where he keeps going to the wrong place can kind of drag it, but it didn't drag this time for me. But it is an outlier in terms of Stewart's character, who is much lighter. He's a kind of a concerned family man, and there's a little bit of complexity in his marriage to his wife Jo, Doris Day, but mostly it's just about a family kind of shaking off some mild doldrums to come together and solve this problem of where the heck is our son. And it's all done with this very kind of positive drive, and it ends with 75 verses of Que Sera Sera, and everybody's
That's
happy
right.
again. The others are much richer in a variety of ways, and I think you can almost see a through line in Jimmy Stewart from his Rupert Cadell to his L.B. Jeffries to his Scotty Ferguson character, which I don't even know if Hitchcock ever even dreamed of that connection. I think he just saw something in Stewart as a man who was interesting to watching others, and he used that in such interesting and ever richer and deeper ways. And Rear Window is my favorite of those.
We can assume that many of the people who are going to listen to this podcast have in fact seen Rear Window, but if you had to give them the potted synopsis of what this film is about, how would you do that, Brad? How would you tell people what Rear Window is all about?
Okay, well, if you don't mind, because I've heard this question asked of many people on many podcasts, and I felt it would be kinder to your listeners and to you if I wrote something out. So I'm going to read this with as much verve as I possibly can, okay?
Mm-hmm.
L.B. Jeffries, whom we will hereafter call Jeff, is an adventurous photojournalist who has had his leg broken in a work-related accident. He has been stuck in his studio apartment in Greenwich Village for weeks, and his only company is Stella, an insurance company nurse who comes daily to tend to his physical needs, and Lisa Fremont, a stunning fashion model whom Jeff met when he was assigned to shoot a cover story about her, and who also comes daily to tend to Jeff's other physical and emotional needs. Lisa is very much in love with Jeff, but he is convinced that she is too posh to suit his lifestyle. Jeff is stuck in a wheelchair in a heat wave and is bored out of his mind, so he amuses himself by watching his neighbors. His voyeurism titillates him until he comes to suspect that the salesman across the courtyard has murdered his wife. Of course, nobody believes Jeff, but Lisa starts to encourage and assist him in his belief, probably because it draws them together. They try to gather evidence and present it to Jeff's police detective friend Tom Doyle, and the result is that Lisa breaks in to the salesman Lars Thorwald's apartment. He catches her, and as the police arrive and sort things out, Thorwald becomes aware of Jeff. And in the thrilling climax, Thorwald enters Jeff's apartment and tries to kill him, but only succeeds in dropping Jeff out of a window and breaking his other leg before the police come and arrest Thorwald. The ending is slightly ambiguous. Jeff and Lisa are seemingly closer than ever before, but I'm not exactly sure how long that will last.
Now, you know the film a lot better than I do, but I gotta tell you, I didn't think that Lisa was a model. I thought she was like a fashion editor at, Harper's Bazaar or something. I thought she was, someone involved in fashion, but I didn't think she was actually a model. I assumed that she was much more of a kind of an executive type person.
I can think of maybe 17 or 18 pieces of evidence to support what you just said, but it will kill my lifelong vision of her in Central Park wearing Edith Head being photographed. I do know that she is the cover of that article in kind of that Life magazine type magazine that Jeff works for. And that might be because she rose from fashion modeling to becoming more of an editor. I do know she goes into meetings and makes choices and goes to a variety of different public events. So let's just move on and call it a draw.
However, she's not the one on the cover of the magazine we see at the beginning of the movie.
It doesn't look like her, but that is supposedly her.
No. I'm telling you for starters, it definitely isn't. There's a credit for who it actually is. And even on the audio commentary on the Blu-ray, which I know you don't have, by Stephen DeRosa, who wrote a book about, which you probably
John
have.
Michael Hayes,
yeah, he makes it quite clear. He says, a lot of people get that wrong. It is not her.
I know it's not her, but
it's not meant to be her.
It's not meant, but the idea still is that he wrote an article about her. That's how they met. Or he photographed.
Well, I tell you what Stephen DeRosa says is that what you're supposed to gather from that is that he does occasionally do fashion photography, and that therefore when Lisa wants him to do more stuff like that, it's not a kind of crazy request. It's not like it's, Robert Capa, who is always out doing wars. He does all kinds of assignments, and he does do fashion stuff. So for her to say, why don't you do more of that? And therefore we can have, a more together life. She's not talking out of the top of her head. But I'm not here to correct you, Brad. He said, getting spanked. But enough about that. So the film was based on a short story by Cornell Woolrich called It Had to Be Murder that was originally published in 1942. Rather interestingly, it was originally submitted under the title Murder from a Fixed Viewpoint, which is a terrible title, yes. But points to one of the essences of the story, which is the story is told in the first person, and also it's very much about seeing everything from the point of view of the narrator, so which is L.B. Jeffries. And so the short story is about this person who is in this sort of apartment, and they're looking out of their rear window, and because they're temporarily incapacitated, and the short story doesn't tell you quite how he's incapacitated, in fact, until the last line of the short story, which is quite fun. Right. But he starts to, partly out of boredom, because of course there's no Lisa in the short story, and he starts to look out of his window and then starts to suspect that one of his neighbours, Lars Thorwald, has potentially done away with his wife. What did you think of the short story? I obviously unfair to ask you to compare it with other Woolrich short stories. I will tell you it's quite typical of his work in many respects, and is quite similar, for instance, to an earlier short story called Silhouette, which is about a couple who are outside basically waiting for a bus, and they look at a window that has the shades drawn, and they think they see a murder being committed behind it, and they have to decide what they're going to do, and so on and so forth. So, this idea, whereas, one of the things that's different about the story, of course, is the disposal of Mrs. Thorwald. That one is she ends up in the upstairs flat. under some cement eventually,
Consistent, right.
which is also something that which is this kind of the room with something wrong idea. So something's not quite right, and he'd definitely done that in several short stories. What did you make of it?
I sought the story out years and years ago as a way to sort of extend my knowledge and experience of the movie. And I enjoyed the story, but I think the movie is so consequential to me that I always thought of the story as very lighthearted. And I know that you can barely use that term to ever describe Cornell Woolrich's writing as a rule. So I reread it for our meetup, and I was kind of surprised at how dark it really
Mm.
is. Just in little touches. I found a couple of things I just wanted to share with you. As he's watching his neighbors, he writes, "The chain of little habits that were their lives unreeled themselves. They were all bound in them tighter than the tightest straitjacket any jailer ever devised, though they all thought themselves free." That's dark. And then there are only two other neighbors that we ever really get to hear anything about, and one is the Jitterbug couple, who are kind of the comic relief. They are so frantic to get out and about and have their fun
Mm.
that they always forget to turn off the lights, and the husband has to jitterbug his way back in and turn the lights off. But the other one is a young mother with her young son, and a line I wrote here: "She put her child to bed, leaned mournfully over its cot, then sat down with heavy despair to redden her mouth." So, in just a few brief mentions, Woolrich paints a picture of a woman who could also be the topic of one of his stories or even novels. A mother who's probably out there prostituting herself so she can feed her child. So there is darkness there. Also, just there are a lot of houses. I don't quite know. There's no real sense of where this is. I assume it's maybe New York or some aspect of New York or just a city. There are houses and there are apartments. The Thorwalds live in an apartment building. And the setup of the apartment building is so interesting because they are completely renovating the apartment building from the top down. And the Thorwalds live near the bottom. So up above, they're jackhammers and workmen and constant sounds. And the one time he mentions Mrs. Thorwald, who's pretty much gone by the time the story begins, is remembering that he had seen her looking out her window miserably, clearly not well, and unable to rest because of the constant noise of construction going on around her. In terms of the mystery element itself, despite some changes like the fate of Thorwald and some of that, there's quite a lot that's similar between the two. But what it's missing is what I think is the reason that Hitchcock, when he was given the option or the chance to buy the options to both this and To Catch a Thief, said no to this because it didn't have a love interest, and he likes a love interest. And it wasn't until and we'll get to this, but it wasn't until the love interest idea was introduced that he really got interested and bought it and turned it into a Hitchcock film. But it's a great little story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun story, and I think that what makes it very typical of Ulrich, I think, is the depiction of Jeffries as a kind of a lonely person. He's kind of there on his own, and he's a kind of a Woolrich type stock character in that sense. A lot of his best known work feature these kinds of alienated people or people who for some reason are alone, and so you get that sense, as you say, of even that depiction of the single mother in the short story sort of tends to reinforce that, because you get the one support character you get is Sam in the short story, who comes and sort of helps him out and does things around the house for Jeffries.
Sergio, don't you find it interesting that here's a 1942 story about a white man with a black houseman, but who's so much more than that, a friend
Yeah.
named Sam. And in 1942, we have another wonderful example of a jaded white man with a black friend named Sam. I don't know if Woolrich was in any way influenced by Casablanca, but it is a fascinating coincidence.
It is. I mean, I don't think many people went to see the play. Everyone comes to Rick's, and the movie definitely hadn't come out. The short story precedes it by about 6 months. But absolutely, and in fact, it's one of the things that works the best about that short story is that they're basically on a completely equal footing, which is really nice. And as you say, it's an unexpected element, and I think a very welcome one. It's one of the oddities about the film. I'd forgotten this, but I just rewatched the film, and obviously there's that bit when Stuart rings up his cop friend, and of course
Yes,
you have the young girl,
babysitter.
I think, babysitter who picks up the phone, and it's this very kind of cliched maid type figure. It's the only thing that makes you kind of go, hey, okay, fine. There are people like that all over
Yeah,
the world. She could be from Hungary, but I don't think so.
no,
And it stands out. And in a way, as you say, whereas in the short story, one of the things that makes a story a nice, strong story in its own way is precisely that because it's important because it's the only person he talks to. He has no close relationships. Even the relationship with the cop is okay, but it's smaller compared with the number of appearances that the equivalent character has in the film, and so therefore he's more integral and more important as a figure in the story. And I think it's just one of those nice things to read that from a 1942 short story. So that's kind of great.
it's also interesting to see the contrast between Hal Jeffries pushing Sam to risk his life to get information on Thorwald versus the relationship we're going to see between Jeff and Lisa in the film, which is very different. And then you start thinking about characters like those played by Manton Moreland in the later Charlie Chan movies, who are very
Mm.
reluctant to get into danger. I don't know. I don't feel a sense of stereotypical quality about Sam in the story, which is great.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that gives it strength. So I think it's a decent short story. Woolrich wrote a lot of short stories, and in the 30s in particular, he was churning them out at a prodigious rate. It's one of those things he wrote in two distinct modes. 7 early novels that he wrote that is kind of jazz age novels from the 1920s, that virtually nobody reads now, but which got him noticed at the time, and in fact even got him briefly a film contract at First National, which eventually became part of Warner Brothers, particularly for his book Children of the Ritz. And then there's this gap, and and it's the Depression and what have you, and he starts writing for the pulps, and is writing a huge amount of notable stories that get very, very noticed very quickly and do well. But it's not until 1940 that he starts publishing novels, and ultimately publishes about, I guess, 13, 14 novels under 3 names. A little bit of a shame because I think most of the reputation that he has now is based on those kind of classic 40s novels. And yet there is a wealth of material in the short stories. Not everyone's a fan. Julian Simmons famously was negative about Woolrich just based on a collection of short stories he mentioned, which is a poor one, it's got to be said. He decried the kind of, I think what he refers to as a high-pitched whine of the tone of the short stories, and one knows what he's getting at. And in those stories that he's talking about, that they are very far from his best work. But he is very much one of those people who really defined the kind of noir sensibility and approach. And so in that sense, is absolutely a major writer. And God knows he was popular. The number of adaptations of his stories in radio, movies, and television
Sure.
in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it's just huge, particularly the 40s and 50s. Just quite extraordinary. Yeah. And what's interesting here is that one could connect it to The Window. You seen that one? It's based on a short story of
Bobby
his.
Driscoll.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
based on a story of his called The Boy Who Cried Wolf.
Yes, I did watch that not too long ago because I was getting onto a kick. I had just read The Bride Wore Black. It's the only novel I've read, which I love.
Yeah, great.
It's more than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was kind of going to be a list of Adrian Messenger kind of thing where just this group of men are just
Oh,
being
right.
stalked and killed. But the sequences are also varied and interesting. The sequence where the man is taking care of his kid, and it just Woolrich had something right from the beginning, and I have a few more in my shelves I do have to read. But the films and I've watched. I've talked to you about how much I love Phantom Lady. I could sit
Yeah.
down and talk with you about that one for a long time. But The Boy That Cried Wolf was cute. It was good. I thought it was a good movie, and not great, but good.
Yeah. So it has a different tone, different feel,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah,
But I like it. I
very
think,
pulpy.
yeah. But okay, so if we think a little bit about the movie itself, so
Okay.
by the time the story is represented in a Woolrich collection in 1944, it's been retitled Rear Window, and it kind of stays with that title evermore. That collection got bought by Paramount for $5,000, which was not really enough because it was they bought all six of the stories in that collection, and Rear Window was one of them. And apparently, Joshua Logan was the first person who was asked to write a treatment, and I think he wrote something that was about a dozen pages or so, as I understand it. I don't think it's enormous, but it was the first proper treatment. And so when eventually Hitchcock and Paramount decided to do it together, they did get the rights to the short story and the treatment as well. It was a useful treatment, but ultimately they started from scratch.
Josh Logan had only directed one movie, 1938. Mostly he did Broadway. Okay, he wrote the treatment in 1951. He was coming off the back-to-back success of Mr. Roberts and South Pacific. He does insert a girlfriend. Her name is Trink, and the situation that he develops is reversed. Trink is a TV actress. She's struggling. She's traveling a lot, and she and Jeff are seeing each other when she's in town. He wants her to give up her career and settle down in New York so they can get married. She doesn't want to do that. He thinks her acting is silly. And then when they get involved in this situation with Thorwald, and he watches from across the courtyard how smoothly she maneuvers her way through the situation when Thorwald catches her, he realizes she's a good actress and he respects her more, and they're going to be happy forevermore. So that was a kind of interesting thing. But Sam's still in it, and a lot of it is sort of more akin to the story. So it was moving in a little direction that I think interested Hitchcock because he wanted a love interest. And then he bought the treatment. Logan wanted to direct it himself, but he got paid like double for the treatment. So he made money off of it. And now it belonged to Hitchcock, and Logan leads our story.
So John Michael Hayes comes in because he's been working on radio, and he's been working on some of my favorite radio shows, like The Adventures of Sam Spade. And he was a really popular radio writer of the time and known for writing very, very quickly. And he'd started working on film scripts as well. And I think, though, that it was probably more his radio work because, of course, the nature of Rear Window is such that you're kind of stuck in one environment looking out. Therefore, in a way, it's almost like a stage play and very dialogue heavy from that point of view. So someone who could do, I think, witty dialogue, but also can convey things in that way, makes sense. So that's the kind of writer that you perhaps might think of to do a good job. Certainly, I think, as an amazing calling card. I think Hayes had written 3 or 4 films by then, but I think it's extraordinary script. I think it works brilliantly well, and I think Hayes does a fantastic job. He gets a bit undervalued, I suspect. He wrote lots of good, really good scripts, but I think he did a really good job here. And it's very interesting how they adapt and expand that short story and make it into the film that we know so well, not least just because of the way that they use the love interest character to kind of really modulate the story, but also to have it as a through line so that you start in one situation and you end with another. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think there's a kind of a mythology that Hitchcock was such a controlling man that all the writers he worked with, everyone he worked with, basically kowtowed to him. And certainly Hayes was younger and less experienced, but I do think that Hayes brings a ton to it. He had just done a movie with James Stewart, so he kind of knew how Stewart worked. Thunder Bay. He also claims that he sort of based Lisa on his wife, who was a model, and kind of on the situation of their own marriage, where he was reluctant to. They were reluctant to become a married couple until he became more successful, and then they got into this auto accident, I think, and they were near. She got thrown out of the
Yeah.
window. He looked at her and he realized, oh my God, I can't lose this woman. And they got married right away. So those kinds of experiences are infused in that relationship. He also tells the story of, being in the army. He had never been a projectionist, but they needed a projectionist for their showing movies. And the first movie was, I think, Shadow of a Doubt. It was the only movie available. He showed it 90 times. He really dissected that movie and became a Hitchcock fan. And so when he met Hitchcock, he could really talk about Hitchcock film to Hitchcock. And I think that impressed the guy too. He had his credentials by the time he sat down to work with Hitchcock on the screenplay, which he fully credits Hitchcock for guiding him through. So I'm sure it was a team effort, but I agree that Hayes's dialogue is brilliant. And also, Hayes says that what Hitchcock really taught him was how to use silences, how to use visuals rather than dialogue. And that is apparent throughout the movie, too. So,
You heard of that market crash in 29? I predicted that.
Oh, yes, how'd you do that, stuff?
Oh, simple. I was nursing a director of General Motors. Kidney ailment, they said. Nerves, I said. Then I asked myself, what's General Motors got to be nervous about? Overproduction, I says. Collapse. When General Motors has to go to the bathroom 10 times a day, the whole country's ready to let go.
We should talk about the supporting cast. I mean, we've got to talk about Thelma Ritter. What do you think about her in this? Because apparently Stella was something of a character that recurs in Hayes' scripts, I think.
my understanding, recently read that she is basically a continuation of other Hayes characters that she played. She's my favorite part of the movie.
Yeah.
I love her. She's funny. She's wise. She's smart ass. The first 5-10 minutes of the movie are basically quotable lines by Stella. You could have a little coffee table book called The Wit and Wisdom of Stella. She's great. And the double take she does at the end of that, thanks, I want no part of it.
Yeah.
It's like my great Aunt Helen, kind of so New York. She's wonderful.
No,
A maladjusted misfit.
I know. It's so sweet. I want to see what she does when she goes home. I want to see her interaction with her family, because I think it's just great.
Right.
It deserves its own movie. In fact, its own TV show or a radio show, perhaps, and I'd love to see that or hear it. That's one of the, one of the joys of the film is how well cast it is. But I mean, I think the neighbours are terribly well done. I mean, one doesn't want to underestimate that because they're all literally, apart from the Thorwalds, they're all, they're not uncredited as people. We don't really get names for any of them, so they're defined by the kind of nicknames almost. So you've got, the Newlyweds, or you've got Miss Lonely Hearts or Miss Torso, which is the most prominent perhaps. And yeah, I think that they work terribly well. You feel like you genuinely know them, quite well, because I think that beyond the, the pun of saying, well, we've observed them rather a lot. And obviously we see them in different ways because we're being manipulated in terms of how we experience their lives in a surreptitious way, because it's this odd situation where it's not because he's gone there and said hello and having a chat with them. It's because he's using a long lens and he's spying on them because he's sort of bored. But spying always seems a bit mean, whereas he's just observing what's going on because he's got nothing else to do. He's stuck there. And so he's looking at what other people are doing in their lives. And yeah, I think they're very well drawn. I like the character interactions, sort of Miss Torso and all the people who are coming and sort of gadding around her, and Lisa makes a great comment about the fact that she's having to do that hard job of managing all these men who are, flitting around her. And
Juggling wolves.
yeah, and then we get the sculptress downstairs who's got the sort of hearing aid, and so it's quite fun. You get her turning the hearing aid on and off depending on the music that Miss Torso is playing, and also not having a particularly good relationship with Thorwald next door, for instance, and of course the composer, who again is a fun sort of figure who I think does seem to, in lots of the beats of the film, sort of matches Jeff a little bit. You feel like when he has good moments and bad moments, or the situation that he's going through, sometimes, when Jeff looks at him, it sort of mirrors his own situation. When he's down, the composer is down. When he's up, it's sort of the composer is up. It's sort of interesting. I mean, I don't think it follows it that closely, but it's interesting how they make it match the emotion of the scene in question. It's always that shot reverse shot, and it's kind of like you look at, and then you see how Jeff or Lisa or Stella are reacting to that situation, and that gives it the meaning. And I think that works very well. I mean, it's the core of the film.
Well, clearly the neighbors are supposed to reflect Jeff and Lisa, and they do. The composer, creating a work of art is something like trying to solve a mystery. You're reaching for facts, for clues to how it's all going to come together. And we watch his process actually quite intimately when you think about how little screen time he really has. We see the ups and downs of his trying to put this together. We hear them. We hear the chaos of the music, the cacophony of it. There's a point where he brings the musicians in. They're all jamming. It doesn't quite sound right. We see him in despair. We see him drunken in despair. And that's what's happening with Jeff in his way. He's frustrated in his chair. He's frustrated not knowing what's happened to Thorwald. He can't seem to piece it all together. That goes very nicely together. Lisa is compared by Jeff to Miss Torso, but she compares herself to Miss Lonely Hearts. And of course, there's that brilliant shot towards the end when she's up in Thorwald's apartment and Miss Lonely Heart's about to down a whole bunch of seconals, whatever, and the music plays, the finished product of the composer, and the two women simultaneously stand up and walk to the window and listen. And for Miss Lonely Hearts, it saves her life. And for Lisa, it endangers her life because Thorwald is coming down the hallway. It is one of my favorite moments in the whole film. One of those back tinglers, that happen.
Hitchcock does do that about 2-3 times, doesn't it? Where, the moments when they're not looking out of the rear window and they're busy doing something else and something is happening behind them, but we don't see it until, because we stay with them. We're looking, say, at James Stewart, and then he looks up and he says, oh, what? Oh, no, hang on, he's gone, or whatever. And which is great. I think it's handled so superbly.
And then the Thorwalds, I mean, you can really see a connection with Jeff and Mr. Thorwald. Both men are kind of feeling henpecked. They both wear these thick lenses, one of them actually as spectacles, the other as telegraphic lenses. And they both have pretty but demanding women. The woman who plays Mrs. Thorwald has vaguely the same coloring as Grace Kelly. So there are similarities there. And I think Hitchcock is very fair. Hitchcock believes strongly in marriage, but he's very fair in showing these three different marriages, the newlyweds at the beginning, who by the end of their honeymoon are kind of tired of each other, Harry, and then the Thorwalds, who are in a real crisis, but they're not like in any extraordinary, it's not like Columbo, it's not some high-powered pair of people, it's just an ordinary Joe and his invalid wife. And then that adorable couple at the top, who don't have very much but each other and their little dog too. He shows different options to Jeff, who's watching them all, to see what he might be able to find. And he's unfortunately focused on the Thorwalds and what he thinks will happen with the Thorwalds.
But it's one of the interesting things about the film because it's one of a select group of films which are set really in just one location. Experimental films. So obviously you've got Rope, you've got Lifeboat, and Dial M for Murder, which is the film that he had just made and was, literally shooting while Hayes was writing the script for this. And they're all kind of, for different reasons, they're all kind of focusing on a single location, primarily in the case of Dial M for Murder. And I think that this is obviously the one that feels like the most important example of that approach. Hitchcock was such a theatre lover, so it does feel very theatrical. There are kind of apparently 31 apartments, and they were all rigged for light, and they all apparently had hot and cold running water apparently installed, so that people could just sit there and use them. All part of a lighting grid, where there were 4 different types of lighting for morning, midday, evening, and night, right? And you just threw one switch. Okay, we're doing the night stuff now. In fact, one of my only regrets about that is that they don't do enough at the early evening, because I love that ochre look of that kind
Beautiful.
of, that sunset, which is just wonderful, and I'd love to
The
spend.
scene when the opera singer is doing her trills, and he and Lisa are having a lovely moment, and the lighting for that is beautiful. The outdoor lighting is beautiful.
So on the one hand, we've got these experimental elements within it, and yet it's suffused in this very Hollywood star film, if you will. So audiences feel safe watching something that may be a bit unusual, and yet sometimes, but it's still an exciting film that's going to give you all those elements that you really want. One of the interesting things about it is, for instance, is the music. Obviously, we mentioned the song, and again, it was a melody written by Franz Waxman, who wrote the score for the film. But it's this odd score, isn't it? Because although you get a title music and you get a little sting at the end, strictly speaking, the music is always, it's outside of the norms because there isn't any traditional scoring.
Men, are you over 40? When you wake up in the morning, do you feel tired and run down? Do you have that listless feeling?
How well do you think that works? I mean, for instance, I've got a recording of parts of that score. It's actually been recorded, I quite enjoy listening to it. I like Waxman's music, so I think it's quite good fun, and it's very jazzy. And he was one of these people who was one of the first composers to incorporate jazz into their Hollywood music scores. Do you think the music really does sound like it's just coming out of radios and things, or do you think that it is, in fact, that there's a kind of diegetic element to it?
I say this as a person who loves Bernard Herrmann. I think this is my favorite score because it's like, it does feel like our primary sources of are the composer's apartment, Torso's apartment, and evidently the cafe bar across the way that Miss Lonely Hearts ends up going into. People are just listening to music in that courtyard all day long. The traffic going back and forth on the hot parts of the day, the little children are in the street at the fire hydrant screaming. People are talking. The woman's taking care of her bird. You feel throughout that you're not being overly scored. You are actually sitting with Jeff in his apartment, kind of observing real life. And real life does contain noise and music and things like that. And I think the sound design is brilliant. I think the use of songs is brilliant. And at the same time that it feels like an ordinary day, the careful choices of these songs to reflect, as much as the neighbors do, what's going on with Jeff, with action, all of that, the evolution of Lisa and Jeff through songs like Mona Lisa, which is very formal, very pretty, like the image of Lisa that Jeff won't get out of his head, that kind of cold, pristine beauty, and then leads to Lisa, which is lush and romantic. I think it works beautifully.
And again, that was this Waxman's fourth score for Hitchcock. The most unusual, obviously, after doing Rebecca and Suspicion and Parodying Case.
And don't you love the opening music? It's so chaotic and fun.
Yeah,
I love those violins that
which is
just all
very
so
odd. It's very odd, isn't it?
very
It's
strange.
yeah.
Ding, 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 ding.
Also,
It's 1950.
did you spot that bit of that sort of bit of music that Miss Torso is playing to at the beginning, which is from A Place in the Sun?
Well, what's that supposed to be, ma'am?
It's called hunger.
He's recycling a little bit of his music. It's the
Is
bum
he?
ba ba bum ba 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 ba, and it's originally that bit where Montgomery Clift goes walking through the woods towards the end of the film. So it's been
Oh, I
redone.
didn't notice that. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
I love the idea that you get the kind of leitmotif of the love song called Lisa, and the way that you get it in its germ form, and then ultimately it's fully realized recording right at the end of the film. And I think it does work beautifully.
And my favorite neighbor, of course, is Miss Lonely Hearts, and the scene where they play Bing Crosby singing "To See You Is to Love You"
Yeah,
from one of his old movies, and she has her imaginary date, and we see for maybe the first time a look on Jeff's face that maybe he's not doing the right thing.
yeah.
Maybe he's being kind of an ass. The music is perfect because it's exactly what Miss Lonely Hearts only wishes it would be. That smarmy kind of romance that she has to find something real. She doesn't know how to find it yet. Neither does Jeff.
But it's a bit like, if he is a cinema goer, he's our audience surrogate. We're watching it as a movie and he's the movie goer. The apartments in front are the film that he is watching, if you like. We want to use that analogy. What's interesting is that Miss Lonely Hearts suddenly she's dropped into a John Cassavetes movie and it's making him feel uncomfortable. It's real though, and he acknowledges that. But like you say, it's handled with I think genuine sophistication, because I think there's good acting there, but it's also, it's well written, it's well constructed, because it's this idea
Yeah.
that he's looking at that thinking, oh, this is a really private moment, but not in a fun, silly way. It's not people who got caught in the rain and fell through a window, trying to get out of the rain because they usually sleep outside because of the heat. And instead he's seeing this sad emotion. Her story is quite compelling because, of course, we then will see her with this young fella she brings back. And again, I thought that was awfully well acted because the guy, that you can hear teensy weensy bits of distant dialogue. So it is there, it is scripted. But I think even the young fella who's playing it, right away, who he is. And it's not being overplayed. And right away, it's wrong. This is going to end badly, and you're watching, you're thinking, oh no, this is bad, don't do it, this is a mistake, but not in some kind of car crash way. You're just thinking this is going to be humiliating for you, this is going to be sad. Yeah.
We've seen what her standards are. Her standards are candlelight and wine and being made love to. And we see that he's not capable of that. That's not what
He's
he
a callow youth, and he
exactly. And he thinks he's going to have an easy no strings night with this older lady. And it's heartbreaking even as it just begins,
yeah. And I do think that, again, it's just I think genuine sign of sophistication. I think that the way that's all handled and delivered to us as audience members, and I think that works so well. You almost don't expect that aspect of it to be as compelling, I think, somehow, because, of course, the primary storyline lies elsewhere, but they've really thought it through. And I think that's always really enjoyable. And so certainly in my case, like you, I mean, you were kidding about it before, but I've probably seen the film 10 times. I've seen it at least 4 times, I think, at the cinema, at least. I don't know about you. I once saw it actually I saw it in San Francisco.
I might have seen it 100 times. It's one of the films that I can kind of mouth the words as I'm going along. You know, I love this movie.
The construction of it, which is taken from the short story, this idea that you're always in his apartment. So you're seeing it from his point of view. So that's the challenge that Hitchcock has sort of set himself. He does break the rule a few times. He does it in big emotional moments. I mean, beyond technical cheating, some of the close ups where it's quite clear that you're not using a telephoto lens literally from that part of the set. It's quite clear that the camera is much, much nearer so that they could get a clear shot. And that exists in interviews with Robert Burks, where he said no, they had to actually redo that. They tried doing it from the other end of the set with a really long lens, and it just wasn't, the kind of lenses they could get in 90-53. It just wasn't good enough. So in fact, you get this slightly odd thing where you see Miss Lonely Hearts, for instance, which is getting ready to walk out, you realize it's a tracking shot. You realize the camera, and it's because they're on a gigantic boom to get the angle right. But because they don't want to have to move it to the middle of the stage, they're leaning in. They can't pivot. They're too close. They have to move along with it. And it's one of the few bits that feels, if you know what you're watching, it can feel a little bit, okay, I know what's going on here, fine. But what do you think about the way that when you get the scene, more than halfway in, after all, because you do have to wait a good 30 minutes before, as it were, the plot really kicks in. It's after 30 minutes that Jeff starts to really think something might be up with Thorwald and his wife. But when the dog is found dead, which is when they've kind of decided they probably made a mistake, and the camera suddenly moves in, you get these close-ups that are not from Jeff's apartment. They're actually of the neighbors. I remain ambivalent about it. I know why he did it, I think. I'm curious to know what you think, because I don't think it quite works.
Well, I think that you kind of have to step back and go into the larger topic of how Hitchcock is dealing with the whole idea of voyeurism, because clearly Jeff is making some moral mistakes as a voyeur. He's prying, he's seeing things. Why didn't he call the police when someone tries to attack Miss Lonely Hearts? I don't understand. And very interestingly, he and Stella see her about to take pills, but they forget because they're so caught up in the Thorwald story. But I do think that those neighbors help serve another purpose, not just reflecting on Jeff and Lisa, but also on this whole concept of community and our responsibility to each other as a community.
Mm-hmm.
So that Hitchcock is saying to us, voyeurism, it's bad, it's fun, and it's very important sometimes, because if you see something terrible happening, you have a responsibility to aid in that. If Jeff didn't snoop on the Thorwalds, he would have gotten away with murder. And they think that, as much as I take away many points to any director or writer that makes us deal with the death of an animal, the death of that dog is like a signpost to Jeff and then to the community that something is wrong here. And it's a bigger picture. These people are all very separate from each other. They don't connect with each other, even though they share this very intimate space. The dog brings them all together for just a moment. And then you see at the end of that nobody's really ready to come together as a community. It does help Jeff and Lisa, however, who have changed their minds about the direction they're going into. And they are now steadfastly dedicated to the purpose of capturing this murderer. So I think it works.
Yeah, I think, what it is that in terms of how it was handled, in terms of shot selection, so I'm being that granular, okay, Brad, it still feels to me just a little bit arbitrary. In the sense that it doesn't feel like you've created a special moment a little bit over the halfway mark of the film where you're going to break the aesthetic, stylistic approach of the entire film by suddenly moving the camera to do close-ups. In other words, you leave Jeff's apartment. Your point of view is now completely shifted. You're now much closer to these other neighbors. You've never been there before because you've only been able to look at it, in essence, from afar. Now you're being, as you say, because it's an important moment. Like you say, it's a genuine pivot in the story for our two main characters, but also for everyone in their own way. Although, as you say, there's something very interesting about the way that, of course, it's this sad moment for everybody, but everybody ultimately is sad and then just goes back to their apartments. What else are they going to do? But I just don't think that in terms of how it's shot, because there are some shots that are done from Jeff's apartment and some that the camera is just a bit further in. And I'm just thinking, this is strange, and it's you know what I mean. It's this odd moment. I don't want to get too into it because.
Well, but I think I respectfully disagree with you. I do think, I mean, the next time it happens, this is sort of a foreshadowing for the bigger moment at the end
Yeah.
when it's Jeff who's in danger, who might be killed. And now the camera will show the reactions from outside of all the other neighbors as they come rushing out and see. We see Jeff hanging from an objective position.
Yeah.
And that will springboard people into connecting as a community, as we see in the epilogue. So I think he's onto something here. I respect your not feeling like it's well grounded, perhaps. It's a very important speech that the lady gives. She has a name, I forget what it is. And mostly we see it from Jeff and Lisa's point of view, but we do also get a glimpse of other people seeing it because it's setting the stage for what will happen at the end when they actually do step out of their own lives, away from their own windows, and reach out to each other.
It's done with more emphasis. Obviously, when you get to the end of the film, you get those shots, and at that point, we've left his apartment, you know, and so he does do an odd thing. Hitchcock seems to have decided that it wasn't fast enough. So there's quite a lot of speeded up action, which is such a shame because it dates it, you know, this weird thing that, and it happened into the 60s and early 70s where they would speed up the action in this kind of obvious way. And it's weird, right? Yeah, because you sort of think,
it is very strange.
You know, on the other hand, and we haven't talked, and we must backtrack because one of the most beautiful and extraordinary moments in the film, of course, is when he slows down the action, when we get the introduction of Lisa and we get this, you know, gorgeous kind of close up as her shadow falls over sleeping Jeff, wakes him up, or he opens his eyes, and full frontal close up of Grace Kelly, and then she comes close, but it's been step printed so that it's slowing it down because it was shot at normal speed. And then, you know, they kiss, and then we end up back at normal speed. But this slowing down, this emotional rallentation of the emotional moment to extend it and expand it is so beautiful. It's such a great moment. You know, it takes your breath away. I loved rewatching that bit.
Well, I think of three kisses in Hitchcock, the series of kisses in Notorious, which are frantic and lustful and so much fun. And then, of course, the deadly kiss in Vertigo that is so brilliantly rendered that it's sort of half kiss, half madness. It's just the revolving turntable and the return to the mission, and his head is just blowing up. But the colors are all bizarre, and oh my God, it's so something. This, of course, is the best kiss in Rear Window. The first moment of suspense when he's lying there and the shadow starts to pull itself over his head. You know it's a Hitchcock film, so it has to be a killer. And then you have that slow motion kiss, which is the ultimate romantic kiss. And then the dialogue, which is also brilliant. How's your love life? So, how's this? I don't know.
It's great. You do a great Grace Kelly, Brad.
Who are you? You know?
Yeah. Who are you? Yeah.
Right. And then she says, she pulls back. The camera starts to pull back. And as she does each light, she gets larger on the screen. The camera keeps pulling back to go from headshot to torso to full body to that glorious Edith Head creation, the first of many that she wears, Lisa Carol Fremont, and she is the ultimate Hitchcock blonde for me.
Reading from top to bottom. Lisa. Carol. Fremont.
Is this the Lisa Fremont who never wears the same dress twice?
Only because it's expected of her.
Actually, speaking of Vertigo, as we sort of were, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, and I think it's important in the film and also connects us a little bit to the Wendell Corey character, Doyle, the policeman, when we get that important sequence quite early on in the film when James Stewart's Jeff falls asleep while he's been staying up at night, checking up on Thorswell, see what he's doing. And he doesn't see Thorwald and what looks like his wife leaving the apartment. And he misses that, but we see it. And to me, this looks forward to the letter writing scene in Vertigo. Because it's this moment when you know something our hero does not. Throughout the entire film, you've only shared one person's point of view. You've never been allowed to see anything else that they didn't see. And now you do. And what's more, it's potentially damning because it encourages you to then see what Doyle is saying in what I think is a great scene when Doyle comes in and is quite severe with them, when he sort of says, there's a private world out there that you're just peeping into and people can do things they couldn't possibly explain.
You mean to say you can explain everything that's gone on over there and is still going on?
No, neither can you. That's a secret private world you're looking into out there. People do a lot of things in private they couldn't possibly explain in public.
Like disposing of their wives.
Get that idea out of your mind, it'll only lead in the wrong direction.
What about the knife and the saw?
Did you ever own a saw?
What, at home in the garage, I had...
How many people did you cut up with?
His wife went off, got on a train, arrived at the other end, so did her luggage, she sent him a card. It all looks completely normal. You have no reason for thinking what you're thinking. And I love the way he plays it, because he's playing it straight, but Lisa and Jeff are upset with him, so he has to leave because he's trying to tell them you're wrong, and they don't want to hear it. And then she sort of says, we must be a real pair of ghouls, upset that he's not a murderer. But I love the way that's handled. But of course, we are encouraged to start to feel slightly ambivalent because we have this information he does not have.
I've read that, Hitchcock was not a big fan of mystery per se. He didn't like whodunits. He did a few. They're not his best movies. He didn't like to keep that kind of knowledge from the audience. He felt that if he shared something with the audience that his characters didn't know, he reached his true goal, which was the generating of suspense. So once we know in Vertigo that Judy and Madeline are the same person and that Scotty is a dupe, it completely changes how we see Scotty. It completely changes our view of the film. And here we are told something that I think most of us, like Jeff and Lisa, are ghouls who want Thorwald to be guilty, right? I mean, if Thorwald comes over and says, I'd like you to meet my wife, you've been mistaken all along, and here's a lawsuit for $3.5 million for defamation of character. It's not a very good movie. We expect him to be the killer. We want him to be the killer. This throws a little monkey wrench in our plans, but it also puts us on the side of the director. And now we are a little distanced from Jeff, which is probably much more suspenseful than just kind of wandering around with Jeff trying to figure out how to prove something. It's like, but Mr. Jeffries, we know something we'd like to tell you. We can't, but we'd like to tell you. And that's suspenseful. It is an interesting moment. It's fascinating. But I don't think any of us want that woman to be Mrs. Thorwald.
But that's what's interesting, right? And I think that gives you that. It's very unusual for a Hollywood movie of that era to present something in a way that makes you question something as fundamental as that, because it made me consider, and I'd just love to know what you think. I was mentioning to you earlier before we started recording that I was recently having a chat about Green for Danger, and both the book and the film. And when that film was made, the director, Sidney Gilliat, who was not really a fan of whodunits, he'd written several, and he wasn't a fan, and he's the one who later adapted Endless Night from the Agatha Christie, which I actually think is a decent movie. But he wasn't particularly a fan of the form, and he really considered taking the whodunit element out of Green for Danger when he made the movie. Or, in other words, he wanted to really focus on the strength of the characters and their relationship. So while possibly the deaths might still have happened, the emphasis would have been very far away from the inspector, shall we say. It'd be a secondary character. It's sort of happening, but it would be a minor character actor playing that role. Because what he wanted to do was make a film about those people. And as I was rewatching this, I kept thinking, in a way, like I was saying, I'd love to see a show just about Stella and her husband and their family and what they do, and maybe some of her other clients. Equally here, I keep wondering, what if it had just been ambiguous, unresolved, or let's say that what Doyle says ends up sticking, that basically Thorwald maybe is not a nice guy, but he didn't actually kill his wife, and it's just a very bad case of domestic disharmony. But in the end, so it becomes about what they are as people, and so we focus on it as a romantic drama. So it's about their relationship, and it's about how this moment in their lives has brought them together, or what have you. But you just get to spend time with them, and you get to spend getting to know them, and you get to enjoy them. How important is it that it be a mystery that can be resolved and that is resolved, that leads to a kinetic, dramatic finish?
I can think of two reasons why it's necessary to have Thorwald murder his wife. The first one is obvious. It's a Hitchcock film, and people expect the affirmation of something suspenseful and dangerous and bad that is then vanquished in the end. That happens in all his movies, except Vertigo, where it's vanquished, but everyone dies and everyone suffers. But, a happy ending because the bad guys are rooted out. So that's what people would have walked into that movie expecting. But the big thing for me is that I think we probably are agreed that Hitchcock's major purpose in this and most of his films, but in this film, is to get Jeff and Lisa together. And if it turns out that Thorwald is innocent, then what we're stuck with is a snoopy-nosed voyeur who can feel shamefaced and embarrassed and low about everything he's been doing for the last 6 weeks. He's watched people make love. He's watched girls strip down. He's watched a woman almost kill herself. And he's watched this couple fighting and evolve this fantasy that has brought in his girlfriend, his nurse, and the police. And now he's got nothing for it. That's not a person that I want to give to Lisa Fremont. I think that we have to see the worth. I mentioned this earlier. I think we have to see the worth of what Jeff is doing. It may be smarmy and it may be a little dirty and a little stupid. Why doesn't the man have any books? Why doesn't he listen to the radio? He isn't whiling away his time in the best manner. But ultimately, there is a good purpose served here. He brings a man to justice, and that kind of helps him become more deserving of Lisa, who is, kind of perfect. So that's kind of why I think Thorwald has to be guilty.
So this is a film that was very popular in its day, but for slightly complicated and slightly dull reasons ended up not being around for a long time. So a lot of films have been made as homages. There have been official remakes. In fact, John Michael Hayes even worked on a sequel idea at one point.
I never heard that. What was the sequel about?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been sort of the further adventures of Lisa and Jeff, basically, and something would have happened to them after they got married or what have you. But it is it came out of this weird situation with regarding to the rights of the short story as separate from the film entity itself. So there was always this complication with those elements that belong entirely to the film and those that are derived from the short story. So anyway,
wouldn't it have been interesting if Jeff and Lisa had been the couple at the bus station, at the bus stop, and done the whole silhouette story. And
Yeah,
Lisa's like, "Not again, Jeff, not again."
exactly. I mean, that would last all of 5 minutes. Exactly. It'd be fun, but
Right,
for about that, absolutely. It's the kind of thing you'd see at the Oscars, basically, if they
right, right.
reunited them, right? Yeah. But why not? But I remember seeing a number of things like the John Carpenter TV movie "Someone Is Watching You" with Lauren Hutton, or Body Double, the Brian De Palma film, or more recently the Steven Soderbergh film Kimmy, which is a very interesting kind of post-COVID take on it. And in fact, as I was watching this, it did strike me that in a way it's almost like a sort of COVID kind of story. So that they're all sort of trapped in their own, siloed in their own little places, and there are all these distances between them almost. But because in this case he's stuck in he's got a broken leg, and he isn't ambulatory, he can't really connect with people. And that situation that was true in lockdown, where you just weren't able to go out and meet people. And, that gave it an extra resonance, which I found very interesting, but also because I think the film itself, Rear Window, has been described partly based, I think, from the Woolrich short stories point of view, which is this idea that these characters are sort of trapped in their own little lives and with their own problems. And until the very end, as you say, they're not necessarily brought together. So their problems seem to persist because they're kind of sort of trapped in their own little narratives, their own little movies, and you're not able to effect change. And yet, obviously, crucially, at a certain point, which is in the short story, of course, Jeff contacts Thorwald to upset the plans and to undermine the scheme in terms of the murder of his wife. And that's what changes the story, and that's what changes the dynamic of the narrative. And it was just very interesting watching that and just thinking about those situations where, in lockdown, where we were kind of, just looking out the window all the time. And if you haven't seen it, I would recommend Steven Soderbergh's Kimmy, which is written by David Koepp, who's a very good
I
writer.
watched it because you told me
Yeah,
to,
what
and
did you
I loved
think?
it. I mean, she does go out, but I thought it
Mm,
was a very suspenseful film. I wasn't just crazy about the Lauren Hutton movie. Have you seen the films Searching with John Cho and its follow-up Missing? John Cho plays a father
no, no.
whose daughter goes missing, and he, for whatever reason, has to do his search for her totally on the internet and using phones and internet. So the whole movie is played on screens.
Oh, okay. No, no, no. That sounds interesting.
And then Missing is the same thing. A girl, a teenage girl, her mother goes on a kind of vacation to, I think, Mexico with her boyfriend and disappears. And this girl does not like the boyfriend and is convinced that the boyfriend has absconded with the mother, but she's not in Mexico, so she has to connect with people there and use screens and stuff. They're both actually quite clever, fun mysteries. And it's interesting that, again, the protagonist is trapped, pretty much being a voyeur to the action and dependent upon people, not all of whom are trustworthy, for their information. And I like those very much. You mentioned some films like Body Double, which I always thought was a little bit more like Vertigo. I understand
Well,
there's a
it's the two combined. It's
it's the
Vertigo
two
meets
combined,
Rear
right?
Window.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So there's lots of that. I remember, for whatever reason, watching the remake with Christopher Reeve, and as
Hmm.
heartfelt as Christopher Reeve's situation was, I just didn't think it worked. I also am problematic about Gus Van Sant's frame for frame remake of Psycho, which isn't bad, but isn't necessary, and kind of
Hmm.
shows that there's more to it than just a good script, which Psycho has, or a good shot plot. There's something more to it. There's the dynamic, the relationship, the chemistry between the actors, and the chemistry between the actors and the director. And that's what Rear Window has that most of these others don't have, or don't have as well. But the
Hmm.
ideas that are in that movie that are used in other movies can often be very interesting and fun to watch.
Yeah. There's one that I don't know if you've seen it, The Bedroom Window.
Is that Steve Gutenberg?
Yeah, and Elizabeth McGovern, and it's a Curtis Hanson movie. And I always thought that was a clever premise because he's pretending to be the witness because it's actually the woman he's having an affair with, but she doesn't want to expose herself because she's the one who's married and he isn't. And so he says what she has said and pretends to be the witness and then gets into trouble. And I always thought, no, that's a really interesting idea. I really like that. And but Hansen was, very smart guy and did a lot of interesting. He's someone with a real understanding of the genre, if you like. I mean, I don't know what you think about LA Confidential, but as an adaptation, you could argue it's quite poor because it rewrites.
Oh, it's a beautiful movie.
It's great fun as a movie, but as an adaptation of the book, it's frankly owes more to The Big Nowhere almost than it does to LA Confidential. It's strange. I don't like the ending. I've never liked the ending of LA Confidential. I thought, the Happy Ever After ending, didn't buy it. So there you go.
I might own it. I haven't watched it in 20 years.
It's a great movie, though. I'm only knocking it with, I'm only criticizing with very faint ways. I think it's I've seen that film so many times. I really enjoy it. I think it's really entertaining. So, okay, if you had to recommend another noir type film, having accepted that we love Rear Window beyond all measure, is there a film? I mean, I love the sound of the John Cho film, though. But is there a film in a similar vein that perhaps you would recommend?
You asked me to come up with an idea for a noir that I've recently seen that I wanted to recommend. And I actually just saw, because I was taking a class on metatextual films in Hollywood looking at itself. And they showed Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which I had never seen
great
before.
Film. Love it.
Oh my gosh. I loved that film. I loved, I think it's one of Robert Downey Jr.'s best roles. Certainly it's my favorite Val Kilmer movie. Michelle Monaghan is wonderful in it. And it's clever. It's cleverly filmed. I love the narrative structure of it and how the film sort of goes back as he says, "Now, what did you think I was going to do here?" And ultimately just gives it all up and just looks right at the camera at the end and says, "Well, there's my story." I can't wait to watch that one again.
It's great.
I don't know that it has much to do with Rear Window, but as a modern neo-noir comedy, it is the best.
And it's technically based on a Brett Halliday book.
Yes.
And good luck finding it. I mean, I think you get it on Kindle, but getting a paper copy of that, although, it's one of the ones that was ghostwritten, and I don't know how closely it really is based on it. But I love that film, and I love that bit during the end credits when they apologize for all the swearing.
Please stay for the end credits. If you're wondering who the best boy is, it's someone's nephew. Don't forget to validate your parking. And for all of you good people in the Midwest, sorry we said fuck so much.
It's great. It's great.
That's an inspired choice. Brad, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, mate. You need to come back much more often.
I would love to. Anytime.
Maybe next time we'll talk about Agatha Christie movies. How about that?
Well, the greatest expert on film noir of all time, Agatha Christie. I can't wait.
Perfect. See you soon, mate.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix, and it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.